They didn't care when Trump was being moved to a bunker and they were making fun of Trump, including Joe Biden, told Trump to go back to his bunker. Didn't care about that. What's up, Mo Farmer? How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Thank you for calling in. Appreciate it.
So I kind of wanted to talk to you about the touch on the January 6th stuff at the debate a little bit, and uh, also my argument about uh, Snitch's views on not voting for Trump because of the false electors.
Sitch, you said from Adam and Sitch?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
I think Vance did a poor job on the January 6th. Let's start with that. I thought he did a poor job on the January 6th stuff because he he kind of dismissed it. But your argument was that him dismissing it was, let's move on. Why are we still talking about this? Was a better action, and I don't know that I agree, but
Well, let me ask you this, just to get a sort of a framework for where we're coming. Do you think January 6th was an insurrection and that Trump engaged in it, or do you think that that's overblown and that's not what happened, or somewhere in between there?
I absolutely think it was overblown, but I don't condone the violence that happened. Yet I'm kind of with you on like the riots that went on for the entire previous year seem to be easily justified.
Okay, so let's. This might be bad form, but maybe I could explain myself a little better by sort of going to a tangential topic. You remember when Trump, every time he would speak, people would be like, "Do you condemn Nazis? Do you condemn the Proud Boys? Do you condemn David Duke?" You remember that? They would ask him that all the
Yes.
time. All right, and then he would be like, eventually he'd be like, "David Duke, I don't know who that." Well, yeah, I already condemned him. And then they would be like, "Oh, but he didn't condemn it." See, this time he didn't. It's easy to say, of course, if you ask me if I condemn racism, of course I'll say yes. Why can't he just come right out and say it? There comes a point where when these narratives are being pushed over and over and being used for a political cudgel, and in this case with January 6th, not only is the narrative being blown way out of proportion, but it's being used to censor political opposition, it's being used to treat them like an enemy, it's being used as a cudgel to win political battles, it's being used as an excuse to have the FBI target opponents as domestic terrorists. That's what's going on with January 6th. How many times do you continue to give oxygen to that topic? I went on to debate this left-wing streamer, Destiny. I don't know if you know of Destiny. You probably do if you know who Sitch is. So,
Oh, yes, I know.
okay. So Destiny debated Andrew Wilson on sort of, was January 6th an insurrection? And Andrew Wilson takes an interesting tactic where he's like, his position is, and I think the correct position is like, I don't give a shit what we call it. If you want to say the definition of insurrection is broad enough that January 6th meant it, but then also means that all sorts of other things are insurrections, like Black Lives Matter riots, then sure, we could call them both insurrection, and so now what? So the Democrats engaged in an insurrection, Kamala Harris promoted a bail fund for him, the Republicans engaged in an insurrection, Trump seemed to speak favorably of some of these people. Now where are we? Now what? Now what do we do with this? Why are we only focused on one? You know, and that's Andrew Wilson's argument. It's like, listen, if you want to concede that both these things are insurrections, fine, let's do it. Now what? Now where are we? Why do you only care about one? Why does the FBI only care about one? Why do the Democrats only care about one? What's up with that? They didn't care when Trump was being moved to a bunker and they were making fun of Trump, including Joe Biden, told Trump to go back to his bunker. Didn't care about that. They didn't care about Kamala Harris promoting a bail fund. Didn't care about that. That violence was all swept under the rug. And now when there's one instance of violence, and I agree with you, I think there were people that acted poorly on January 6th and they should be held accountable. But certainly it's being blown massively out of proportion. So Andrew Wilson does that debate with Destiny, and Destiny copes afterwards, and he says, Andrew wouldn't give a definition. He wouldn't give a definition. So then I'm not going to go through all the details I've done on the show, but he asked me if I'd like to talk to him about January 6th. I said, sure. I was at work and on vacation. As soon as I got back, I called him that day, had this debate. And basically, the premise of the debate was he was upset because there wasn't a definition of insurrection given by Andrew Wilson. So I said, I will do that. I will give my definition of insurrection, and we could talk for as long as you want about what the definition of the term insurrection is. However, the agreement I would like to have is that I would like the second half of this debate to be about how I think this is applied in a two-tier system, and it's applied in a double standard. And whatever definition of insurrection you're saying that Trump meets, that same definition would have been met, or January 6th would have by Black Lives Matter and a bunch of other things that we didn't treat in this way. And I think that that's the more salient point. And Destiny agrees to it. For 5 hours, I sat there and talked about the definition of the terms insurrection, which is not a part of the debate that I'm interested in at all. You want to say all these things are insurrections? Fine, I don't care. Fine, whatever. What I'm interested in is the way that that term is applied to demonize certain people and to use lawfare against them in the two-tiered system. That's what I'm interested in. And so I do that 5-hour debate, and then Destiny rage quits when we get into 10 minutes of talking what I want to talk about. Immediately following that, I was inundated with requests. Right now in my DMs is Hutch saying, Rob, do you want to come on and talk about the Jack Smith court filing for tomorrow? Because the Democrats understand that this issue is an offensive issue for them. The more we talk about January 6th over and over and over again, the less we're talking about the record of Kamala Harris. The less we're talking about the economic and border record of Donald Trump. And so constantly, the people that control our narrative, such as these moderators and the Democrats, are going to continue to be like January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. What is the correct response if you're J.D. Vance? Yeah, let's dive deep into January 6th. Let's talk about exactly what happened and give definitive answers. And actually, it looks like that there were FBI informants that were there. We're still waiting on the IG report to see if they were potential agitators. And, you know, the chief inspector that was there, his name was Capitol Chief Sund. He said that there were all sort of problems that stemmed from the sergeant at arms that answered to Nancy Pelosi. And then there were all sorts of problems that came from the military that were connected to sort of General Kelly and General Milley, not Kelly. And, you know, do you delve deep into that? Because you could talk about that for 5 hours. You could talk about it for 10 hours. But who's the audience for that? At the end of the day, Vance had a very effective strategy. This election should be about the record of Donald Trump versus the record of Kamala Harris. Were you doing better financially under Trump? Yep. Was the border better under Trump? Yep. Was the world more safe under Trump? Yep. That's what it should be about. The more he delves into January 6th, it's only beneficial to the other side because that's an offensive argument for them. No one's going to vote for Trump because January 6th, but potentially people will vote against Trump for January 6th. And so I think that the best strategy to employ is just being like, hey man, we're looking forward. We're moving ahead. That's what we're talking about. You're talking about something 4 years ago. The American people don't care. This has been litigated over and over and over and over and over. And that's where I'm at on it. How many hours must I spend? By the way, the same people that are asking me to talk about January 6th over and over again, when I was talking about the corruption of Russiagate and the illegal spying on Trump, you know how many of them wanted to talk to me? Like one.
Probably none.
Pisco talked to me
Probably
somewhat
none.
about it. He made excuses and came across as a fool. But none of these other characters wanted to. We weren't having panels about it. They didn't care. And so what I would say to you is, yes, I think that if you're someone that thinks this was overblown and you would like to get into the nitty gritty, I think I've done a very good job debating people like Pisco, Destiny for hours and hours. I probably talked to January 6th about those two alone for probably over 30 hours between conversations on X and conversations on these chats. I've talked in great detail. I've talked to him about what the definition of insurrection is, about the double standards, about what exactly happened on that day, about whether or not Trump was engaged with inciting violence. We've talked about all of that. But where does that move the needle at this point in your chance to bookend? This is the last chance that you get as a campaign to sort of address the American people in a situation where you're directly opposed to your opponents. And so I thought his answer was fine on January 6th. What more would you have wanted him to do? Do you think in his 2 minutes he should have delved more into the details?
I don't know that I want him to dive into the details. I just maybe bring up the fact that nobody was charged with an insurrection, and the Supreme Court, they used laws to lock up people that was overturned in the Supreme Court. I don't even know that all the January 6ers have had their trials and are not still setting out there. I've heard still waiting on trial for the situation. Yeah. Maybe if he would have just brought up slightly some point about that.
Think about this though. Like once you start talking about that, then Walz's countertext like, "Oh, so you're sympathetic to the insurrectionists." These people tried to overthrow the government, and now you're complaining about their treatment, right? And then it gets, so if you're out there and you don't know much about this, like you're just an average person. Like I saw this the other day, I think it was CNN, went and like were interviewing people in like January 6th. And one guy was like, what? February 6th? What? Yeah, I don't know. I guess some people engaged in violence. That was bad. Like if you start being like, oh, okay, well, this particular person was jailed unjustly, like you're just making this an area of focus that I feel doesn't need to be. And then your opponents are going to be like, oh, you're sympathetic with the terrorist. You're sympathetic with the insurrectionist. I think the best answer in that format, where you basically have 2 minutes, is to say, look, we're trying to move ahead. But Trump said be peaceful. Trump ultimately did transfer power. Yeah, there were things regrettable that day, but ultimately it moved on. Biden's the president. But if you want to talk about attacks on democracy, look at what they're doing with the censorship. I thought that was a pretty good answer. I think the only part I would have liked seeing added when Walz made the comment about sort of defending violent insurrectionists, I think that Vance, it would have behooved Vance to be like, you spoke highly of Black Lives Matter as they were engaged in riots, and your boss, the presidential candidate in your ticket, promoted a bail fund for them after they burned down a police station. So I'm sorry, it comes hollow from
there you go. That's maybe where I'm at. I thought he could have slid something in there a little bit just to you kind of see my point.
Yeah.
And to bring this back with the whole Sitch thing, I like Adam and Sitch's, and I understand they're moderates that probably lean left, I would say, but the whole point of him saying I can't vote for him because he caused this insurrection and had this scheme with these false electors. The false electors thing just blows me out of the water that they keep using this ammo, and that there's more and more proof that this isn't true. You know what I'm saying?
Well, look, the false electors things was a legal strategy. You could agree or disagree with the legal strategy, but it was a legal strategy from people, in my opinion, that legitimately thought that the election was stolen from them, and they were trying to throw a last-minute Hail Mary legal strategy in order to get more investigations and more courts to look at what they saw as potential evidence of wrongdoing in the 2020 election. You don't have to agree with that legal. You could have been against Al Gore's legal strategies in Florida with the hanging chads in the 2000 election, but he had every right to do it. And it doesn't make him an insurrectionist. It doesn't. It was a legal strategy that he attempted to use, right? And so the idea, I think Sitch puts too much on. Now, I understand the implications. If the implications are Trump knew that he lost and he tried to steal the election anyways, then I understand how you could say, even if I think his policies are better than his opponents, I can't vote for him because he's someone who tried to steal democracy. That's not what he did, though, in my opinion. He legitimately thought he lost, and he tried to employ a legal strategy, and it may be a legal strategy that many people wouldn't have been a fan of. But I think that's far less egregious than the legal strategies the Democrats have employed to subvert our democracy, such as the insane amounts of lawfare that they've used against Donald Trump. And one of the things I'll say with Sitch is, I think that he has been very charitable, more so than is warranted, to organizations like the FBI and the double standards that they've done in their lawfare against Donald Trump versus his political opponents, such as allowing Hillary Clinton's team off the hook for literally deleting subpoenaed evidence, but then going after Trump and charging him with obstruction of justice for classified documents, for documents that they ultimately got their hands on. So, I've talked to Sitch about this. Unfortunately, it was on a platform that I found quite strange with P.F. Jung, who I like P.F. Jung, but it was, I don't know if you saw my conversation with Sitch on the false electors thing.
Yeah, I did see that.
It was unfortunate because I felt like that we couldn't delve into the details, but I respect Sitch's decision to not vote based on that. That's okay. I disagree with him, but I don't think he's an evil or terrible person for that. I think that he's at least tried to do research and he's came to a conclusion, and that's fine. I just think that that's not, I think that it's not a good extrapolation of what's going on. It's being very uncharitable to Trump and his team, and it's overlooking a lot of the shenanigans that went on. Again, if you go back and you look at the alternate elector strategy from the Hawaii situation, and I believe the 1960 election, there's a lot more similarities than you're led to believe that what happened with the Trump situation. For example, Destiny and them have said, well, the difference is they were fake electors this time because they were sent to Congress and they weren't certified. But the same is true in Hawaii of 1960. The only person that could certify the electors was the governor, and the governor certified the Republican slate of electors. And yet the Democrats still sent their slate in. Now, ultimately, the Republican governor would change his mind days later. But at the time that the Democrats set their slate in, because they thought that the recount wouldn't have been done until after the time frame had gone through, and so they went ahead and sent their slate based on the definition that people like Sitch and Destiny are giving. Those were an illegal fake slate of electors. They were not certified. There was no legitimacy.